Thank you
On
for having me.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. We are on Beginner's Mind today, live on LinkedIn, and you have an extremely amazing career. Serial entrepreneur, IMD professor, consultant to boards, and you practice basically every single side of the venture game, from entrepreneur to teaching to consulting, and everything is in your books. Thank you very much for joining me. Before we dive into these session,
Mhm.
what are the three most important key takeaways people will get in this episode?
Um, these are things I'll probably repeat later on, but I'll say the first one is I have a firm belief that society needs entrepreneurs to move forward. Without entrepreneurs, inertia takes over. And entrepreneurs need capital. And so the role of venture capital in helping entrepreneurs move forward is primordial for me. So that's one of the first things. And this is something that I've lived with, I work with, and I firmly believe it. Secondly, I'd like people to understand whether they are considering quitting their job and becoming an entrepreneur or getting their MBA and someday becoming a VC, to understand that both of these professions, if you want to call them professions, are not for the faint of heart. Both are extremely hard. Both are professions that you learn by doing. You don't get it from reading a book or a website. I mean, you can inform yourself, but they're really, really, really hard. And then the third thing I guess I'd say is I do a lot of work with large corporations, and they do amazing things. And people in large corporations can innovate and have an impact. It's just that it's going to be slower. The impact on the world will be less, and the impact on you as an individual will be less. That doesn't mean it's not a good thing to do, but just recognize there is a difference between innovating and creating something as an entrepreneur with the help of a VC and doing it inside a large corporation. Neither is right or wrong, it's just different. So those would be the three things I would see as important.
Jim, we are in Europe. I am curious to hear your opinion. Which one of these three is most important for Europe?
Oh, I'd say the very first one. We seem to believe that government will get it done for us. And not just our own national governments, but Brussels. And yeah, I have a firm belief that we need government to keep us from our excesses, to give us a little bit of a push in certain times, to make sure that we have a level playing field. But to expect government to solve our problems and move us forward, I think is completely false. We need the crazies to do things. And in Europe, we're kind of a little bit less how should I say, accepting of the crazies. And when I say crazies, I mean both the entrepreneurs and the venture capitalists. Because if you're a VC, you have to accept that you're a little bit odd yourself if you're willing to work with entrepreneurs. So we need that. We need more of that. And we need to celebrate that. Again, not demeaning what government does or what large corporations do, or even small and medium-sized enterprises, but we have to stop expecting the government to do things for us.
Why do we need crazy people in entrepreneurship?
Oh, because the odds are so against success that why would you do this? I'm launching my seventh startup, and okay, I'm in a different situation. I'm late in my career. Financially, we're secure. I'm not going to go too far and mortgage the house or anything. But still, when I tell people, you can see them scratching their head, thinking, "Is he nuts doing this again?" And you have to be. Part of it is your belief in yourself and your belief in your idea. But even that, if you poke hard in people who have normal lives, they can change really easy. Whereas an entrepreneur grabs hold of something and then goes for it. Maybe there's a different word from crazy, but
Mm.
there's this kind of belief that I'm going to make this work. I may pivot 180 degrees, but I'm going to make this work. And I'll find the resources. I don't have any of them today, but I will find them. That's not normal.
Yeah, and it's the crazy ones. There's a beautiful poem, a US poem of a writer of the 50s and 60s. I unfortunately forgot the name. I have to look it up and we'll drop it then in the comments under the live stream. He was talking about the crazy ones and how society needs that. And this is also one of the reasons, my personal opinion, why the counterculture to the establishment back in the 50s started in Silicon Valley
Yep.
and the United States. But why don't we have that in Europe, in your opinion? Why is Europe not on the same level like the United States?
I mean, there are better people to explain that, but my take is we are just too comfortable. I mean,
Okay.
okay, I'm sitting in Switzerland and I know we have poor people. I know we have problems. I know we have criminality. I know we have all, but at the level that we live at, life is wonderful. So when you've got such a good life, why would you want to disturb it by taking a leap into the unknown and maybe being seen as a fool? I mean, if I go back to my first real startup where I took a job in a startup, I came in as the first professional. My classmates from my MBA looked at me and said, "Jim, are you nuts? Is there a problem? Why don't you just get a job with Nestle or one of the Swiss banks? I mean, that's the normal thing to do. Why would you want to go to a small med tech startup in Geneva?" And what they didn't know is that I had made a decision that that's what I wanted to do, that I did not want to get a job with a large multinational. Um, that's unusual because we have a good life here. Why take a risk?
You don't think it's risky doing a corporate career?
Oh, there's some risk, of course there is, and we know the statistics that the average life of a CEO in a large company or even anybody, there will be a reorg, there'll be change, but it's much less than the entrepreneur who bets everything and says, "I'm going to go do this." And then there's the label that you get. Oh, so you did a startup and now you want to recuperate your finances by coming to work in some large corporation. We know what you're going to do. You'll stay here 3 years and then go out and do your own thing again. That's a risk to say that I'm going to have that label applied to myself.
Mm.
Oh, so I do think people do take risk in large corporations. And, I see it here at IMD, tons of people who great careers and then suddenly there's change, new CEO maybe, and you're out. You put on garden leave, which is still pretty nice, but you're out and you have to start the search. It happens all the time. So I'm not diminishing that. I just think it's different when you say, okay, there's no cushion. If this doesn't work and we shut down, I start from scratch. And if you're at least in Switzerland, if you're a director of the company,
Mm.
you don't get unemployment benefits. So there is no cushion.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Starting from corporate career into startup, people realize very, very quickly that there is no cushion, that there is
Right.
nothing that protects you, and it's just either this way or it's the way out and into
Well, and,
bankruptcy.
and building on that, in case you have people in your audience who are in corporate careers thinking about quitting tomorrow and taking the leap into the unknown, one of the things I've seen is the psychological burden, psychological challenge, if you like, when you quit, you start your company and you start going out to call on people who were your former friends and colleagues in your previous life when you were a senior vice president in large company X. They take your first call because maybe they don't know that you're out on your own now. But getting the second call, and then you start discovering they valued me for my title at this large company more than for my brain, my personality, with my capabilities. And that can be really psychologically hard for people to realize that, this has all been a bit of uh, you know, I don't know what the word is, a charade amongst people as to why they took your meetings, why they respected you, said great things about you. Maybe I'm being extreme, but I think that's something that if you're in a large corporation, think about it. It's going to be psychologically hard the first time that somebody says, "No, I don't have time for a meeting with you."
You know both ecosystems, the US ecosystem and the European one. Is this part that you mentioned that people honor titles and not the person behind the title is specific to Europe, or do you see the same dynamics in the United States?
It does apply in the US as well, but there's also more of an acceptance that people make changes. I'll give you a small personal anecdote.
Mm.
So I'm independent now. I went independent in 2012 from a very good life here at IMD, full time, paycheck every month, wonderful colleagues. And I decided I wanted to see what would happen if I quit, if I became a consultant to IMD and did other things. Here in Switzerland, my colleagues and friends say, Jim, really? You just bought a new house. You still got three kids. When I said it to my friends in Silicon Valley, I said, finally, you should have done this years ago. And it was just a different perception as to, the risk I was taking or the opportunity I was creating for myself.
Well, at the end of the day, I mean, it's a good example for the different mindset in Silicon Valley and in Europe, even in Switzerland.
Hmm.
And the success of the ecosystem speaks for themselves, in my opinion.
Yes, yes.
How would you define your mission today?
Um, I want to make it easier for those in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So there I'm including investors as well as founders to be able to do what they should be doing, whether it's creating new products, creating new platforms, new services, pushing us forward. So whether that's through education in the programs that we run at IMD, our venture capital asset management program, for example, helping LPs to understand venture capital as an asset class, or the work I do with our executive MBAs, our MBAs, and others to help entrepreneurs move forward. So some of that is learning, content. Give them a 2x2 matrix and see if that helps their lives. But also the other is inspiration and coaching. 2 weeks ago, while I was hiking in the Alps, I got a text message from a founder that I'd worked with saying, Jim, I desperately need to speak with you. So I waited until I had a break and was able to get a signal and called him. He was in the middle of a crisis with his board, etc. I don't know if I gave him an answer, but I tried my best to analyze the problem, to give him inputs, to give him inspiration, to be able to hopefully move on with the problem. I see that as my job is to help them to do better.
It's now so tempting to ask one question we see regularly asked at this point. Are you ready for it? To
Go
get
ahead.
it. And why are you the right person to do this? Sorry for that, but it
No,
was
no,
so.
no, that's a really good question. Okay, today I can say partly the reason is just plain experience. As I said, I've been in many startups myself. I run the IMD startup competition where I've looked at thousands of business plans. I've coached a lot of startups. I've taught a lot of startups. So there I've gathered knowledge and expertise. But also I think there's a personality thing in there. I have never liked having a boss. Every boss I've had has probably hated working with me. Uh, the boss I had here at IMD for 15 years, he fired me 5 times. Okay, I got back in the very next morning, but there's something there. I don't accept the status quo. I think I'm better at voicing it today than I was, say, 10, 20 years ago. Um, but maybe that's part of it. If you're an entrepreneur, you're willing to say, I disagree with that, or I think I've got a better way. Some people see that as arrogance. And probably it is. It's a certain level of arrogance that I believe there's a better way. So maybe it's partly in personality.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, we have to always find better ways to move forward. Let's roll a little bit with these crazy ones, with this
Okay.
part, and dive into your Vita, how you became who you are. And we go back to the glorious year 1984 when Steve Jobs had this famous speech
Oh
where
yeah.
he labeled, I think it was IBM, as the bad guys,
Right.
and Apple came to rescue humanity. A little bit crazy. And you also did something crazy, in my opinion.
Okay.
US citizen into entrepreneurship and venture capital comes to Europe to graduate from the IMT. Why? Why Europe?
Well, okay, the pieces of the answer are disconnected. So first of all, why IMD? Why do a degree in Switzerland? I was already working in French-speaking West Africa at the time as an engineer, and I realized that my career was probably not going to be a domestic American career. I just enjoyed working with people from all over the world. And so I did apply to various schools in the United States, including Harvard. But I looked at IMD and NCAT as being the leading European schools. Um, and then when I came to visit each of the schools, found that IMD was the best place for me because it was small, it was focused, and it was also a boot camp. I kind of prided myself on doing the hardest jobs possible. I was working as an engineer in Africa. Yeah, I like that. And IMD seemed to offer that to me. The next step is middle of that year, July. So it's a 1 year program. I'm sitting with one of my classmates who was probably one of the smartest people I know. She was a partner at Bain. Um, and she says to me, Jim, you're not a corporate animal. I know you're in an MBA program, and we do MBAs because we want to work in large corporations. That's who comes to recruit here. This is not you. And I remember I can actually look out at the spot here where that conversation happened. And I remember like a light bulb going on over my head. Exactly. That's where my difficulties were in my first job, which was in a French multinational. And I've always joked, I don't know if it's because they're French or because it was a multinational, but yeah, I understood, that the politics, et cetera, were things that I did not enjoy. I wanted to be able to see if I could have an impact immediately.
Mhm.
And that's what started getting me to think, okay, what does that mean? That means small, medium-sized companies. Oh, even better if I get into a startup. And it wasn't long after that, after graduation, that somebody approached me and asked me, we've got this startup that our private bank is thinking about investing in. Could you do an analysis for us? And I did. And of course, I criticized them like a good MBA. I ripped everything apart. And they were the ones who said to me, okay, you think you're so hot. Would you like to run the company? And that was my real entry into entrepreneurship, to suddenly sit there at the desk and figure out, now what do I do? So yeah, these were not things that I sat down and did a nice decision tree analysis and figured it out. You figure it out by trying things and having experience and having smart people around you who are willing to be honest with you.
That's an amazing story. Let's dive a little bit deeper into that. You're in Switzerland, 1984, graduating from IMT, and you get this information. You are not a good fit for a corporate career, but you are in Europe. And when I think back, I'm now in my early 50s, and 80s I was in school, 90s university. The general expectation towards a young man
Mm,
after graduation was get a corporate career, go work in a bank with an MBA and work yourself up the ladder. And if you don't succeed on that path, there is no other option. And you decided to go into a startup when even the term startup was not coined yet.
correct.
What was the internal conversation with you that you had to make that decision without a decision
I,
tree?
actually, it wasn't very difficult and it wasn't a long conversation. So the project I did to evaluate the startup took me about 3 months. And I can remember all during that time, I'm speaking with my new wife. We just gotten married. And she found it interesting, exciting. And I think she could see that this excited me. The idea that they might offer me the job of running the company never occurred to us until the day I made my presentation. And at lunch, they invited me to this. I don't think it took me more than 24 hours to say yes. There was a discussion about, okay, shares, salary, stuff like that. But the idea of, yeah, this is what I want to do. Um, and it was in a field where I knew very little, med tech. Uh, I, I I earned my medtech MBA in that job. FDA approvals, building the next generation, clinical trials, all of that. I just knew that this was what I wanted to do, and not necessarily because it was medtech, but because I could see the entire venture from raising money, which in those days was not with real venture capital. Um, to working with people at the FDA and USAID at the time.
Mhm.
That's interesting. Yeah, but I was involved in every single piece of it. We were a small corporation. I think at the largest, we probably employed 25, 30 people, but I was involved in every piece of it, even though I had this big title, managing director. Yeah, I just knew it was the right thing for me.
It was the 80s. I mean, USAID, just to get it off the list, would be another podcast, I guess. So we just skip the topic and not get into politics around that. Let's stay with the ecosystem. You were in Switzerland in a medtech company, managing director. At a time when startups didn't exist as a term, venture capital was pretty new in Silicon Valley back then. I think it was even called adventure capital
Mhm.
until the 70s. And pitching to VCs was not something that someone could learn from the internet because the internet, for the simple fact, didn't
Didn't
exist back
exist yet.
then. How did you approach this challenge?
Well, first of all, I had a very strong board of wealthy individuals who were willing to act as angels. We didn't know they were called angels back then. They were also willing to help me get loans from the local bank,
Mm.
which again, today that, doesn't exist. If it wasn't for those individuals, we couldn't have gotten it. But I was invited to get to know venture capitalists. And I think may have mentioned this to you. I still remember the first time I pitched to real
Mhm.
VCs. It was a meeting about an hour from here. Somebody had organized a group of people that called themselves venture capitalists, and I was invited to attend. That's all. And I remember sitting in the back of the room, and the leader of the group said, "Okay, today we're going to try something new. We've invited an entrepreneur here to pitch to us, and then we're going to ask him questions." And I'm thinking, "Oh, this is going to be cool. I can't wait to see who it is." He says, "Mr. Pulcrano, could you come forward?" And so literally I had 20 meters from the back of the room to the front of the room to figure out my pitch. Luckily, I had my product in my pocket. It was in
Mhm.
my, and I was wearing a suit on top of it. Amazing. And I got up there and I did my pitch. And then I got tons of questions. And it was exhilarating. And I felt like, okay, I handled all the questions really well. This is great. The calls are going to come in tomorrow. And nothing happened. And so a few weeks later, maybe I called up the person who had organized the meeting to say, can you explain what was going on there? Because I mean, there was lots of enthusiasm and then nothing. He says, "Oh, what you didn't realize is they were all trying to impress each other with the questions they were asking you. It wasn't about you." And that was kind of my first contact with venture capitalists. I'm saying, okay, this doesn't work. This doesn't make any sense. But again, it was Switzerland. It was the late 80s. We didn't even know what real venture capital was at the time.
What did you learn out of this experience?
First of all, not to take the words seriously. And then it's up to me to follow up. Me kind of naively sitting there thinking they want me so badly they're going to call. Even today, no good entrepreneur would do that. You have to follow up yourself. And they can always still say no to you, but if you don't ask, you're not going to get anything. So I'd say those were the two main things, which today seems almost silly that I didn't understand it at that stage. But like I said, entrepreneurship is a learning by doing trade. Um, I learned.
What did you do next then with this company? I mean, this first one failed, and what was your next move?
So I stayed with the company. We made a ton of progress. And then a large multinational decided to step into our space. And I thought we could collaborate with them. I even thought, okay, this is our exit. Even again, I didn't know what an exit was, but it was obvious they should acquire us and take advantage of the 5 years of work that we'd done, the markets we'd built up, the channels we'd created, and they decided to do it themselves. And I knew pretty much at that stage we were dead. And totally by coincidence, I got a call from IMD, one of my former professors, saying, "Hey, listen, we've just gone through a merger. We're now going through the post-merger restructuring. There's blood on the floor everywhere. We need somebody who knows how to grow the market. And you stood out both as a student and as an entrepreneur. Would you consider coming back to IMD as director of marketing?" And the way they sold it to me was every entrepreneur, every manager needs a turnaround on their CV. This one will be yours. And I said no. But then my father had a conversation with me. He said, "Jim, that's fine being the entrepreneur, but now you've got two kids, a wife, you have responsibilities. And worse, you've become one of the world's experts in a niche that is so narrow. There's maybe you and three other people, because I had, again, FDA approval. I had, what you call it, peer-reviewed journal articles, et cetera.
Mhm.
And I realized my father was right that, it's either I go even deeper and narrower, and what can I build on that? Or I come to IMD and broaden myself. And I accept to do that, along with the challenge of the turnaround. Yeah. It was a good move. I'm thankful to my father for that. But I think that also shows one of the problems of an entrepreneur. You get so deep into things, you can't see what's outside. And again, when I look at my role with entrepreneurs, sometimes it's to help them to see things, not because I want them to stop, but that they see what's out there that they didn't notice themselves because they're so laser focused on the problem they're trying to solve or the customers, et cetera.
Such an amazing story, and it's good for IMT that they got you, in my opinion.
I like to believe that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, IMT stands out still today,
Yeah,
and I think its fame has grown over the decades.
it
But
has.
when we go back to the 80s, I mean, it was probably unfortunate. As far as I understand your story, is your company basically failed because a huge corporation stepped in and they just did it themselves and
Yes.
not acquire your company. While in comparison, at the same time, Genentech, for example, in the United States, with an investment from Kleiner Perkins,
Yep.
basically established the entire VC
Yep.
industry in biotech. And this could have happened also in Switzerland with just this big corporation acquiring your company. Um, what was the difference, in your opinion, between these two
Well,
ecosystems?
yeah. I mean, even in the 70s when Genentech was first founded, there was already a feeling like anybody can do anything.
Mhm.
Partly that's an American thing, but also the West Coast. And like you mentioned earlier, the hippie culture, the culture of 1968, et cetera, had really taken root there. And you have this wonderful mix of, if you like, the hippies together with the technologist, where in a sense they inspired each other. We had nothing similar to that in Switzerland. Maybe some parts of Europe that I'm unaware of, but yeah, all through my time in that first company, I remember, I always felt like the odd person when I'd go to uh, any kind of dinner or lunch or whatever that, I'm the guy running this tiny little company rather than trying to conform. Um, yeah, the idea that we'd let a little company disrupt the world, I don't think people were against it, it just would have been strange. Yeah, we've got all these wonderful Swiss companies that are, Nestle. I just came from Nestle this morning, doing amazing things. Why would a little startup do other things? I mean, for many, many years here in Switzerland, whenever we talked about entrepreneurship, we would talk about a company called Logitech. I'm sure you've probably got a Logitech mouse, et cetera. And that
Interesting.
was, is it? No,
I don't, yeah, 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 it is,
yeah,
but it's a very old one, so
yeah.
it really works
But
well.
but think about that. So for I'd say a decade at least, whenever you mention startups in Switzerland, everybody would talk about Logitech. One. And yet in on the West Coast, even in the 70s and 80s, you could already start naming tens, hundreds of them, or at least people who had tried. Here in Switzerland, you didn't have those stories. And society needs stories. We need stories that help us to believe something is possible. And if you don't have stories of friends and neighbors and people you've heard about who have done great things as entrepreneurs, you start to believe that it can't happen.
Yeah, that's great. And when we look further into your story, you came out of the startup, got a call from IMT, and although your heart was saying found the next company, you got a tough conversation, I guess, with your father, and he said, "Take your responsibility, young man, and go down the safe route." How
Mhm.
did it feel for you, this decision then, to rather pursue a corporate career in a traditional form?
Well, I kind of lied to myself. I knew he was right. Again, my wife was very accommodating. She would have gone with whatever I decided, even though there were times where I didn't have a paycheck. I mean, because the way it worked was every couple of weeks I'd sit down with our accountant and say, okay, how much money do we have in the bank? Which bills can we pay? If we don't have enough to pay my salary, we don't pay it. She got used to that, even if she didn't like it. But what I say, I lied to myself. I told myself, it's the turnaround. This is no different than doing a startup. So I convinced myself that this was a good undertaking, and it was my alma mater as well. So if I could help save my alma mater, this was a worthwhile thing. And then as I stepped into the role, I realized I had means within this larger organization that I never would have had in a startup, as far as cash, people around me who had great skill sets, et cetera, the brand, et cetera, and that I could do things there that I could never do in a small company. So that was the way I kind of lied to myself and said, this is the worthwhile thing to do, but I'm only going to give them 3 to 4 years of my life, and then I'm going to go do something else. That was the story going on in my head.
But you are still there.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
So
checking the logo.
yeah, so at the 3 or 4 year point, it took us about 18 months to see that the turnaround was working. I still
Great.
remember the chart where I was plotting cost against revenues and realizing for the first time they're breaking away. I think, okay, and I remember the excitement of that, saying the things we did had an impact. And literally it was 18 to 24 months, and we knew it was going to work. So I started looking for a job. I started talking to people to see, okay, what opportunities are out there, maybe to do another startup. Did I have any ideas? And lo and behold, the head of faculty approached me and said, hey, we're going to create the first new innovation at IMD since 1972. It's our executive MBA program. We want entrepreneurship to be one of the red threads of the program. Would you take responsibility for that? And again, they seduced me, saying, this will be your chance to bring this into a major part of our curriculum. I had a great mentor who taught me how to teach, or helped me to learn how to teach. And then inertia took over. I did get to step out a few times to do another startup, step out partially. So, academia gives you that opportunity. You keep doing your job, but these possibilities of have flexibility. Yeah, and inertia just took over. Having a salary at the end of every month, a big bonus in March every year, wonderful colleagues to work with, facilities. And you see why, when somebody goes to work for a large corporation, how it's enchanting. It's wonderful. Until one day I started looking around and thinking, okay, I'm in my 50s, finished my doctorate, saying, what's next? I mean, seriously, the only reason I did my doctorate was I needed a new challenge. It wasn't because I thought one day I need DR in front of my name. It was more of, I want a challenge. And so I finished that, and then, okay, what's the next challenge? And I decided the easiest thing to do would be to resign. Easy. The thing to do would be resign and see what happens, because now you're on your own. You have to make this work. So yeah, it was a long period at IMD, but and I don't regret it at all. I learned a lot from a lot of people, including the customers of IMD. But I also don't regret the decision in 2012, 2013 to walk away. I'm still, as I said, I'm at IMD right now as we record this. I was teaching in programs last week. But the independence, the freedom, the liberty is something I'd never trade again.
I totally agree. This is something that people realize when they work in a big corporation or an institution like yours, that they have, when they take a risk, they have a lot of budget to take a risk at the company. And when it fails and they have a good management, failure doesn't mean it's the end. But in a startup, it means it's over. It's really
Yeah.
game over. And it can be horrible.
Yes.
When we look at your career, you have IMD, and then you always tried to start other startups. How did it work together? On the one hand, you are in a big corporation or in a bigger corporation, in an entity, and on the other hand, you always took some risk.
Yeah.
How did it work out for you?
Well, a couple of small things. One is I had it written into my contract right from the very beginning that I could spend a small portion of my time outside IMD. So contractually, I didn't have any problems, which it's a small thing, but it's important, because normally when you work for an organization, they own all your IP, et cetera, et cetera. So that I was lucky enough to have, gotten that into my contract right from the beginning. Secondly, I kept hitting my numbers. So even if I reduced the amount of time that I was sitting at my desk in IMD, I made sure I hit my numbers.
Mm.
on whatever it is I was supposed to be doing for the school. But what that means is you work 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there, I learned there that there's that risk of burnout. And I only now do I think, looking back, did I realize that I was in burnout, trying to do both at the same time, and not being willing to compromise on the quality with either of them. That's not sustainable. And I did that. The last time I did it was for almost 2 years. And I wish somebody at that point had had that conversation and said, this is not good for your health. It's not good for your family, not good for your startup, et cetera. But I did. Um, so I probably should have made a choice at that stage, and I didn't.
Yeah, two jobs and family is really hard thing. And the
And we
other,
had
yeah.
we had a child born during that period as well. So
Oh,
it was a
congratulations.
difficult pregnancy for my wife, and yeah, I did not make good choices.
But it all worked out fine.
It did
Um,
work out in the end. IMD was happy. Our son is now 24 years old and healthy and happy. The startup, we actually sold it 3 years ago now.
cool.
The engineer one of the engineers I'd hired became the CEO of the company. All good in the end. But
Mm.
I did pay a price physically during that period.
Do you want to talk about this price that you paid? Can we dive into that or just
Yeah.
move?
Yeah, no, I think it's something that should be talked about. It's funny, when I did the research for one of the programs I run here at IMD for scale ups and looked at the topics that we should include in it, uh, physical and mental health was never one of the topics. But over the last 18 months, I've listened to my participants start bringing it up in class. So this year, for the first time, we actually had it as a session. And I don't know if it's because burnout didn't exist in the past. I think it did. We just weren't willing to talk about it because, hey, as entrepreneurs, we can handle everything. And I think it's only in the last couple of years that we've been able to say, there are limits. There are physical, mental limits. So I'm glad that we're willing and able to talk about it. But I think there's still, even amongst female founders, this macho-ness of, I can handle everything. You want me to work 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year? I can do it. And our investors encourage us to do that because all they care about is us being successful. They don't care about us being healthy. They just got to get a good exit and a good return. So I think it's something that entrepreneurs should talk about, and they should take care of themselves. More and more, I'm seeing good entrepreneurs saying, you know what, tonight is for the family. I can't make the meeting, sorry. Or, I've just had 3 weeks of, fundraising. I have zero energy left. Call me next week. Let's not talk now. And I think that's good. I think it's a healthy thing. And I think in long term, we'll have more successful companies because if you think about how much depends on the health of that founder, especially in the early days. So if he or she is suddenly sick for a month, the company comes to a standstill, and we can't afford that. So hopefully this will be good for everybody to be willing to talk about it and do something about it.
I would love to talk a little bit more about it if you are open to that,
Sure.
or we
Yeah.
can just move on. I mean, my personal opinion, mental health and physical health is important, especially for VCs, because the alternative is that the founder fails. But I do understand it fails and the wisdom is lost, the know-how is lost, the leadership is lost.
Yep.
And when you look at startups, the only thing there is actually the team. And when the team burns out, the whole value is gone and it's not in the IP. In your opinion, with your experience, how would you explain to a VC that mental and physical health is important in that profession, similar to Formula One drivers?
Yeah. Okay. You could do it. This is a good question I hadn't thought about before. You could do it from a very, personal side that, I care about my team. I want them to, stay with me for the next couple of years. I don't want to lose people. That's one way. You could take a different approach and say, okay, let's look at the product roadmap. Okay, does it have to be this way over the next 18 months, or could we extend things by 6 weeks here, 3 weeks there, et cetera, to allow for people to be healthy all the way through it? I think you could go both ways. Or even with the VC, say, okay, we've asked you for enough money that gives us a runway of 14 months. Why not give us enough to get us through to 16 months? And that way kind of reduce the stress, but do it in a way with numbers they can understand, whether it's the product roadmap or the funding. And I think a lot of VCs are starting to understand this as well, that they don't want you dying in the office because that's not to their benefit. Yeah. No, I think you can make the argument today.
Yeah, I think we have to talk more about it. When I'm reading currently the book The NVIDIA Way, written by Tai Kim,
Hmm.
and I'm at this part of the book where he describes the work ethic of Jens Wang,
Hmm.
and it's completely the opposite. He's a workhorse. Did
You
you?
know what? I don't, people who are workhorses, people will tell you I'm a workhorse, but that's a choice you make.
Mm,
But you still need to know where are the limits of my workaholism, because and maybe you need somebody to tell you that. I recognize it now much more than I ever did in the past. When I'm really getting to the end, I think, okay, I'm not paying attention in meetings. I'm losing focus. I'm not asking as many good questions. I wake up tired in the morning. And when I recognize that, I do something about it. And I would encourage others to. But that doesn't mean you can't be a workaholic. I love my work. That's why I work so hard.
this is something I've never understood. Why we miss that part in entrepreneurship and venture capital. I had a job in the 90s at the Formula One was a security guy, so nothing important, but I had the chance to observe the drivers and their
Hmm.
teams. And from what I learned in Formula One was that every single second of the day is organized and optimized for the success of the driver and the team, of course,
Hmm.
including health.
Hmm.
So partying, overworking is not included in that. The sleep is optimized, exercise is optimized already in the 90s, and I think now it's even gotten better. And in entrepreneurship, or when I look into the corporate world, it seems to be completely ignored for decades. Did you find at IMD, do you have some theory why that part of health, mental and physical health, got completely ignored in the
I'm
corporate
not
world?
an expert, but I'll just give you my point of view. I think it's still partly that macho-ness about we can do anything. I mean, so you talk about Formula One, think about top athletes.
Mm.
And yet, we as business people should be treating ourselves at least as good as maybe not the top athletes, but one level below, recognizing that training is necessary, sleep is necessary, nutrition, everything. And we don't. Think about how most business people eat. It's awful.
Yeah.
It's, it just makes absolutely no sense the way we even take in nutrition. Um, we fly all over the world and get jet lagged, and then for the next 6 days, can't get good sleep, rather than say, okay, I have to be ready for whatever's next. Um, and I'm perfectly willing to say, okay, we push the limits, but for how long? Okay, maybe there's, for the end of this quarter, we have to do X, Y, and Z to get there, but recognizing that, okay, the first week of the new quarter, take a break. We don't do it. And I think a lot of it is our belief that we can show people we can do everything, not just entrepreneurs, but also corporate animals.
Well, this is the alpha male or alpha person thinking. So it's I am the
Yes,
toughest guy in the room and I have to prove it to
yes,
everybody. But at the end of the day, it destroys value.
yes,
You mentioned top athletes. I mean, when you look at MMA, Conor McGregor, for example, of course, I mean, you can drink whiskey all the time if as long as you want to. But when you have a fight
yeah.
coming up and you are completely wasted, there is no way that this person wins.
Yeah. I did some work with UEFA, the European Football Association, several years ago, where they invited me to teach in a program for former international stars. So these are not the Messis of the world who can just coast on with the money they've earned. So they're good. My wife would often ask me to get their autographs, but they have to get a job. And I often said to them, you guys are actually better suited for management than most of the managers I meet with. Number one, you've probably been captain of the team at some point, so you have some sense of leadership. Number two, you've been part of a team, so you know what it's like to work in a team. But most importantly, you know how to take care of yourself because you know that every Saturday or 2 or 3 times a week, you have to get out on that pitch and perform, and you take care of yourself. Whereas most of the managers I work with, that's not even a second thought.
At the end of the day, in my opinion, the only thing that we have in at management level, at executive level, and at board level is the quality of decision making.
Hmm.
And when they don't take care of their health, of their mental and physical health, the decision making just, I mean, it's
Oh, we
just
know
not
that.
as good as it could be.
Yeah. Yeah. If your mental health is not good, if you're tired, fatigued, hungry, sick, you can't make good decisions. It's just, it's improbable. You might get lucky, but it's improbable.
Then we have to be a little bit louder with mental and physical health.
Yes, definitely.
When we look back to the 80s and your career, um, let's talk about strengths in Europe. I'm a European. I love to rant about Europe and what goes wrong, but let's take the other route. What strengths do you see in Europe in entrepreneurship and venture capital?
Well, one is, I think, the obvious diversity. And here I'm not talking about DEI, just saying, we got 27 different, minimum, 27 different views of the world. If you go deeper and even look at Switzerland, we've got another 4 different ways of looking at the world. That right there should make any product that comes out of this part of the world stronger, better, more useful for a global world. And yet, I don't think we take advantage of that. We tend, we start in our home country and then immediately go to the United States because it's large, 330 million, consumers. Um, Part of that, so again, now I'm going to touch on a weakness, is the
Go
fragmentation of
ahead.
Europe with rules and regulations that don't make it easy to work across borders. If we could reduce just a few of those, we could have European products that are just as strong as anything coming out of the United States. But so far, I don't see us doing enough of that. But I do think that the diversity of Europe, whether it's the languages, the different points of view, the different cognitive mindsets, is what we need to create even better products than are created in the United States.
Yeah, the average European kid these days speaks at least 3 or 4 languages.
Yeah, my kids are a perfect example of that. And for them, it's perfectly normal.
Mm.
And I just think that's a benefit that American kids will never have. Yeah.
It structures the whole brain in a different way, in my
Mhm.
opinion, and understanding of different cultures and society diversity. But um, I was at university in the 90s, and I would like to find out whether my view is distorted or not. You had your career in the 80s and 90s already in venture capital entrepreneurship and the IMT. When I think back to 1989, it was this glorious time when the Soviet Union failed and Europe could unite. Again, Germany was the first country that integrated East Germany into West Germany and formed Germany again, something people wanted to do for decades.
Right.
Um, the whole Eastern Europe bloc moved towards the European Union, and we had this spirit of reawakening in Europe. It was positive. It
Mhm.
was an entire continent moving forward. We made peace with Russia.
Mhm.
This was something unthinkable in the 80s. Russia became part of Europe. We had economic relations. When I think at my first internships in the 90s, it
Mhm.
always included something in Eastern Europe, Hungary, Czech Republic,
Right.
Slovakia, Romania, or Russia. Uh, the www, the enabling technology of the internet, evolved out of Switzerland.
Mhm.
And they always had the feeling that Europe, with this tremendous energy, with this tremendous positive energy, was at least at par with the United States. Also in entrepreneurship. It was a little bit structured differently, but I
Mhm.
always think every company that evolved in Europe, we had in the United States, we had a counterpart in Europe. The mobile industry, Europe was leading in the mobile
Yeah.
industry back
Nokia.
then.
Yeah.
And then 2000 happened, 2008 happened, and suddenly I woke up in 2018, 19 and thought, what the hell happened in the last 20 years? We lost it. The United States is just moving forward. Europe seems economically into a different direction. What happened 80s, 90s, and then 20 years later? What's your opinion? Is my perspective wrong of the
No, no,
90s?
no, no. Well, let's start with the fall of the wall, etc. I think we were so excited by that the thinking of, oh, and now business wise, what could we do? Oh, we can start building products and selling them all across Europe, et cetera. I think we were so exhilarated by the idea of freedom and the fall of the Iron Curtain and et cetera, that these other things didn't just weren't in our consciousness.
Mhm.
But on the other side, you think of the mid 90s, I'm sure you remember Netscape.
Yeah, sure.
When
Interesting.
Netscape went public,
Mm.
suddenly the world saw something that they'd never seen before, that a company with very little revenue, no profit, just based on intellectual property could go public
Mm.
and people could profit from that. And it was in the US that people really got that lesson. And that gave us the dot-com bubble. In Europe, I don't think any of us believed that that was possible. Those crazy Americans, what are they up to? But it triggered this belief that you could start with a blank sheet of paper, create a company, technology, et cetera, and you could be wealthy and successful. I don't think we ever had that moment in Europe, ever. And we know Spotify, and we've had other companies that have done very, very well, but uh, the idea that a normal person, okay, maybe with a computer science degree, an engineer, or whatever, but a normal person could become a gazillionaire and have an impact on the world. We never had our Netscape moment.
Mm.
Um, and I don't see one on the horizon, honestly. This thing that then gives everybody, whether it's a young person or somebody in a corporation, the belief that I can do that too. Whereas in the US, that has been digested and become part of the DNA. Anybody can do this. I think that's still missing,
Netscape was Mark Andreessen.
right?
Yeah.
And Ben Horowitz.
I don't know, was that so defining? Was that when I read it in the books, it was just like, yeah, it's another company that took off.
Oh
Was it so
no, no, no.
defining for the culture?
Psychologically,
Mhm.
it was huge. I mean, the fact that, well, and there's two big part of it also was it gave us as mere humans access to the internet. Before that, you had to figure it out. Whereas suddenly you had this browser that will allow you to do it. And at the same time, these two individuals from University of Illinois, I mean, who'd ever
Mm.
heard of Illinois, that they could come to California and do this. And now you look at Andreessen Horowitz as a venture capital firm and you work it all the way back to that. Now it seems all logical. But the fact
Mhm.
that that could happen, I don't think we ever assumed it could happen in Europe.
So basically, a simple program back in the day made two people rich that then started investing into other young teams.
Yes.
And this defines the culture from the 90s forward in Silicon Valley. And we didn't have that simply in Europe at the
Yeah, and,
similar
and
moment.
not just it made two people rich, but it made their entire team rich.
Mm.
So, there's stories not just Netscape, but like for example, when Apple went public, like that the receptionist is suddenly a millionaire on paper. That kind of thought that this is possible, we didn't have it here. Um, Maybe you have to have the American DNA to even think it's possible, but they had these events that showed people it's possible. And again, we are storytelling creatures. We hear these stories, we hear other stories, and we start to believe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this stands out, this spirit of participation in a company, not only the founders. I think the European story is still founding team and the investors take basically over. The minute they invest and get 60, 70, 80% of the company, more the
Mhm.
PE mindset. And Silicon Valley did it differently. They handed out stock options
Right?
and the VCs let the founders live.
Hmm.
Did you ever find out where this came from? Do you have a theory
Well,
where this spirit came from?
I think it's basically financial mechanics. I can't pay you very much, so I'm going to give you equity. And you're going to feel like an owner of the company. And I know we hear this from other companies, like I want everybody to act as an owner. But when, instead of being paid 100, you're being paid 70, but you got these options or whatever they may have given you, suddenly you do work differently.
Mm,
Now, 9 out of 10 of these startups will fail, and those options are worthless. But when they do work, again, it's a story that everybody else hears and says, okay, it didn't work in my last startup, but maybe this one will be different. And that inspires people.
Yeah, but the payment in Europe, was generally not good as well. So it's
Yep.
back in the 90s, even especially for young people, what do you expect from a paycheck? Not much. In Europe, the story was very often be happy that you have a job.
Ah, yes. Yes.
At least you have one. And other people are worse. So don't ask for more. But
True.
then I look over to the stories of Silicon Valley, and they said, yeah, well, okay, we can't pay you well, but you get stock options, and if this works, you are rich. And this twist, I think this little twist at the end
Mhm.
of the day makes a huge difference.
Well, and also, the thing I'd add to that is, other than during the pandemic, Silicon Valley has never known unemployment. So, if I want you to work in my company, well, unemployment, so maybe 2, 3% max for qualified people. I'm not talking about service workers, but anybody with an engineering degree or a physics degree or whatever. Um, so if I want you in my company and I can't afford to pay you the going rate, I have to offer something. There is no
Mhm.
choice. And that kind of basic financial mechanism still exists. But again, here in Europe, if you can get paid a couple of 100,000 to work for a large corporation, do you want to take a risk on your ESOP? Nah, no, I'll just take the salary, 6 weeks vacation. That's it.
Yeah, and often you don't have an ESOP because it's not possible in many
Yeah,
jurisdictions still. So there is a lower salary, higher risk, and then there is the high paycheck at a huge corporation. But it's changing. I heard on the All In podcast, or Jason Calacanis in This Week in Startups,
yeah,
where he suggested that the Silicon Valley startups should hire in India to just cut back on the salary expenses. So there is a window of opportunity. Also, the mindset in Silicon Valley gets a little bit less or more
yes.
greedy.
Yeah, I do have views on Silicon Valley at the moment, and it's not the Silicon Valley that I started working with 26 years ago.
But isn't that dangerous for the United States in the end of the day?
I think it's dangerous for the world.
Mm,
I mean, obviously, Silicon Valley is not the only place where entrepreneurship flourishes and where innovations come out. But if we lose that engine, unless somebody rises up to take its place, the world loses,
mm.
and the United States first. And I do think this is a real risk. A colleague of mine just wrote an article based on an interview with me in Forbes magazine, where I mean he was politically correct. So, but I think there are real problems with the way Silicon Valley is functioning. To even though I would never say there's any kind of central government that runs Silicon Valley, there's an ethos that has changed over the last 8, 9 years, and it's accelerated this last 6 months.
What is the new ethos?
Well, I think one of them is incumbents trying to protect themselves,
Mm.
whether it's the Nvidias, the Intels, the Apples, et cetera, trying to put up barriers to the upstarts or the startups taking their place, uh, trying to use government to protect themselves or to give them opportunities. The cost of living has continued to skyrocket there, which makes it really difficult for startups to do anything. And then last but not least, and this is just over the last 4 months, 5, 6 months, visas. I mean, Silicon Valley, not just visas, but and the acceptance of foreigners. Silicon Valley has always been a magnet for the best talent in the world, whether it's because they come to Stanford or Berkeley to do their PhD and then stay, or get hired by Apple from wherever, whether it's French or Indian or Chinese. We're losing that. I mean, the most obviously under the Trump administration, where, if you're a Chinese physicist, maybe it's easier just to stay in China or come to Switzerland. We're much more welcoming than the United States now. So I do see this as being a potential problem for the United States and for Silicon Valley.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing that there is a little bit of fear towards China lately when I listen to podcasts. So things change, but it's a great opportunity for other ecosystems to step
Yeah,
up.
yeah. I mean, we always have these discussions. Whenever I have a class where we discuss Silicon Valley, they always say, "Oh, well, who's going to take Silicon Valley's place?" And again, up until recently, I'd look at it and say, "No, Silicon Valley is still the mecca. attracting money, talent, ideas, etc. But other places have risen up. I mean, in the United States, you can even talk about Austin and other places. Now the question is, will other places continue to rise and Silicon Valley will come down? I don't know. People have been predicting Silicon Valley's demise for decades. But recently I started looking into the history of other places like Babylonia or the Industrial Revolution in London or the Renaissance with the Medicis in Florence and seeing how all of these eventually ended.
Mhm.
Very often it was due to war or to other reasons. This one seems to be self-inflicted. And that's where I think the difference is compared to previous centers of innovation that have died.
Let's keep this for the future prediction of at the end of the recording.
Mm.
Um, and let's move forward in our conversation to the part where we talk about venture capital as a professional discipline.
Mhm.
And I think at IMD, you promote that venture capital is not for amateurs,
Nope.
but for professionals. Why is that?
Well, part of it is what I said earlier about it's a profession that you learn by doing. You can study it and people should study it to learn, whether it's the formulas, the various I mean there is real content, but it's also a craft. And some of my favorite VCs will say to me, I'm no smarter than anybody else. I just have good pattern recognition because I've spent the last 20, 30 years doing this. And I can see stuff that will work and I can see stuff that won't work. Um, but having said that, I think, somebody coming out of an MBA, and I hope too many of our MBAs aren't listening to this, and thinking automatically I can be a good VC. Maybe, but it's unlikely. I'll give you a little anecdote. I was in China 2 years ago in Shenzhen, and we had a program for a large corporation that I do a lot of work with, and we invited in a bunch of Gen Z young people to talk about their careers, the way they see the world, et cetera. And afterwards, I'm talking to one of them, and I asked him, and he looked to be about 25 years old, and I asked him, I said, "So, what do you do?" He says, "I'm a venture capitalist." And I was less than impressed. Okay, chatted with him. But then I went over and talked to somebody else in the room who was an experienced VC. And I said, that guy over there says he's a VC. And he said, he didn't even ask the guy's name or anything. He says, no, until you've lost $15 million of your LP's money and been through at least one business cycle, you cannot call yourself a venture capitalist. Now, we can try to speed that process up by exposing them to different situations, by helping them to understand the mindset of the entrepreneur, by helping them to understand how do you manage a fund. And that's a part that a lot of people don't see. Think about it. The sexy part, or at least what's perceived as sexy of being a VC is I get to pick and choose the entrepreneurs that I'm going to put money into. Then I sit on their board. I help them devise their strategy, da, 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 da. And that is sexy and necessary and useful. But then there's a whole other side of managing the fund. You've just invested in, I don't know, 14 companies. Which ones do you reinvest in? Which ones do you stop investing in? Which ones do you try to merge with others, do deals with, et cetera? That's a part of it that's more like financial management. And even that you have to learn by doing. Um, so I think it is a profession that, you can try to learn by books, et cetera, but you're going to learn even more by doing it.
Doesn't that collide with the European mindset?
Yes, it does. Yes, because we believe we go off to school, we take our courses, we get our diplomas, and now we're ready to do. Um, Maybe that works if you go into government employ, but even if you go to work for a corporation, you're going to spend the first 6 months learning the trade. And it's no different with venture capital or as an entrepreneur. You got to go in and do it. I mean, why do we invest more in serial entrepreneurs than new entrepreneurs? Because they've already made the mistakes and they've made the mistakes on somebody else's money. Um, Same with a VC. When I'm looking at GPs, I'm looking at what did they do in their previous funds that hopefully they've learned from it and will not do those same mistakes in this next fund.
I just imagine a conversation with a big corporation, and me walking into a recruitment situation and say spent the last years IMT, got my MBA, think they would say, well done. Um, this is the role we have for you. And then I imagine another person stepping in, walking in, and ask them, what did you do the last 10 years? And they says, I worked with 7 companies. With 7 companies in 10 years. What did you do? Startups. Oh, okay, startups.
Mhm.
Which one was successful? And he says, none, all failed. Would this person be perceived as an addition, as a useful addition to the company?
Well, it depends on how good that recruiter is. If I was that recruiter, I'd go through each of those 7 startups and say, show me what you learned from this.
Mm,
Because, think about it. You could say made 7 mistakes or 7 failures, but you could also say you've gotten 7 MBAs. Maybe you learned different things in different ones. Hopefully you didn't make the same mistakes twice, but just think of the richness of that. Oh, now, whether the former entrepreneur, is willing to admit mistakes and show the learnings, etc., that's a different question. But a good recruiter should be able to find all kinds of nuggets. We say, "Oh, yes, we need that. We need that. We need that," because you're now a proven talent, rather
mm.
than the newly minted MBA who's got all the theory and is now going to go out and test the theory.
Is this already ingrained in our mindset, in our European mindset, that VCs learn by doing, entrepreneurs learn by doing, and even failure, even a fund that failed and produced no returns for the
Mm.
LPs is something that people could use to learn something? Is this already perceived as an asset?
I mean, let me just say again, I'm older, so I've got experience. If I go back to the '80s, failing in a startup or failing with a fund meant you would never work again. You'd never get a loan again from a bank, etc.
Mm, mm,
Today, it's accepted. It's not liked, but it's accepted. And I'd say that's over the last 20 years, it's become like that. Maybe not quite as it is in Silicon Valley, where it's a badge of honor, but people have stopped having white space on their CVs. If you look closely at the dates on a CV and you suddenly say, wait a minute, there's a gap here between da da da. Sometimes it's a startup. Maybe it was an around the world trip too, who knows? But nowadays, I think people are more willing to put that forward and say, and this is what I learned there. These were the tasks I had, which probably were more broad than anybody who had just a normal corporate job. So a good recruiter should be able to see these things.
mm. I think that Warren Buffett would agree. At the end of the day, also Charlie Munger
Mm-hmm.
with their how do they call it? Um, it's not learning one thing, but several things.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I just think about the corporate world again. And you mentioned that venture capital should be a professional, is a professional discipline. And I can imagine that the corporation just says, we need a CVC, it's hip, it's good for our brand, and let's just assign 20% role in the
Mm-hmm.
company. How would you explain to such a corporation that they should rather consider this more as a full-time role and not something that you just add?
Well, I would first push and ask why they're creating it. I mean, too often I think it's a vanity project by the CEO. Yeah, we have to show our shareholders, we have to show the market that we're innovative. So let's create a corporate venture capital arm. That's the worst reason to do it. Maybe it helps with employee branding and it helps with your share price for a short while. The other side of the coin of saying we're doing it for financial reasons. I also think that's false because if it's a large corporation, no matter how successful the CVC is, it's going to be a tiny little tick on the revenue or the profit. It's got to be more of, there's innovations happening out there that we're never going to see unless we put some money on the table and actually work with these people. And to do that, we need people doing this professionally 100%. It's not a hobby. It's part of growing the company, whether it's because we're going to find innovations that we bring inside, or maybe Cisco's a great example of it, where we invest, and if it works and it fits with our product roadmap, we acquire it and bring it inside, rather than relying totally on our own R&D. Having that as a reason for a CVC, I think makes perfect sense.
Mm,
But you need professionals doing it,
yes.
not just have your head of R&D doing it on the side. That I can't imagine that working.
Yeah, but it's tempting, I can imagine. What makes the venture mindset so special?
Curiosity, perseverance, acceptance that failure is a data point. It's not failure. And this is really hard. I mean, none of us like failure. Failure is horrible. But if you go in and say, listen, part of what I'm doing here, whether it's the business model, the technology, the market, whatever, part of what I'm doing has never been done before. There's no way you can assume perfection on all of that. So if you accept that, part of what we're doing is not going to work, then when it doesn't work, you're okay with it. And now you've gathered data that'll help you to do something differently. I'm going through that process right now with our latest startup because we really don't know what our best market is. So I'm just having conversations, and I had one last Friday where basically I was told, no, this would not be of interest to us. But he said something else later on that said, ooh, maybe that's the piece I want to go down. And I just have to accept that that's going to be a lot of my conversations right now.
Yeah, it's interesting this failure mindset that you can that failure is an indicator of success and not losing a game.
Yeah, I mean, even when we think about Silicon Valley, people see the headlines of corporations making tons of money, valuations out the door, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But again, if we take the metric that 9 out of 10 startups will fail or not have good returns, that means Silicon Valley is the capital of failure.
Mm.
Now, that's not the headline that we read, but think about that. And if you're not a cynic, you say it's also the capital of learning.
Mhm.
So yes, it is successful, big headlines, but underneath that is a ton of experiments that did not work. And underneath that is a ton of data that says, I've learned from those experiments.
Yeah, to building on what you said, I love reading the NVIDIA story because this is basically a story of failure after failure. And
Mhm.
NVIDIA was obvious as a success story. I think it started in 2023. And when I look back to the 90s, graphic cards for computers, nothing special.
Gamers.
2000, gamers. Yeah, exactly. A few bold bets, and it was just a cyclical stock up to 2022, and then it skyrocketed. So it takes a lot of time.
Well, it takes time, but also luck. I mean, call it timing if you like.
Mhm.
But if ChatGPT hadn't come along, would NVIDIA be worth what it is today? I don't think so. We've been talking about AI my entire career. I remember the first time I heard it was back in 1980. Um, it's got its moment right now, and NVIDIA is so perfectly positioned for this.
Yeah, and the book explains why. But you said, I mean, you need a little bit of luck.
Mhm.
But the interesting thing is when someone invests in a company like Nvidia, it's not obvious for a very long time that such a lucky moment will appear.
Mhm.
And when I look at the corporate level with family LPs, for example, institutional investors, big corporations, family offices, business angels who want to invest in VC funds, how can they evaluate a fund? What's the success criteria that you would give them? And they say, look, I mean, Nvidia, it takes 30 years. And a VC investing in Nvidia in the early days, waiting for 3 decades, of course they are successful. But when I wind back to the 90s and I see a venture fund and say, okay, they invested in an obscure company, Nvidia, who knows that? How should I know that this is a good fund?
Oh, you can't. You can't. Yeah, and I'm sure I don't know enough about the NVIDIA story to know how many other companies were, say, equal to NVIDIA at the start and then died for whatever reason, ran out of capital, had a founder who couldn't persevere. I don't think you can know. I mean, part of it may be understanding the founder and his or her team and thinking, how do they get the best return on luck? And luck could be good and bad. I mean, so how do I know that they are the kinds of people that when an opportunity comes along or a failure occurs, they'll get the best out of it? And that's one of the things I probe for when I'm talking with entrepreneurs is not just tell me all the good things that you've done and been successful, but what about when the bad things have happened? Then what? Did you say, okay, that's it, move on? Or did you try to learn from it? And again, I don't know if Jason is one of those people Jensen is one of those people who's done it,
Mm.
but that's what I'd be looking for to be able to evaluate the ventures that my fund has put money into.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's really hard
It is very
to
hard.
bet on the right team.
That's also why you have a fund. So, one of the things that I always say to LPs who are considering investing in venture is don't try to do this directly into startups yourself. So you make one bet on one startup. If it fails, you've lost everything. But use the diversity, if you like the rigor of a portfolio to say, okay, this portfolio should give me a good return. I mean, this is basic finance.
Mm.
Um, I'm hoping I can convince LPs, or I mean, I made the mistake myself of choosing one startup as an angel investor and hoping it's going to win. That's crazy. Um, I've stopped doing that.
Yeah, it's a success chance in a startup is less than 1%, in my
Mhm.
opinion. So it depends when you come in, but it's really less than 1%. And betting the farm on a 1%
Yeah.
chance, it's interesting. Um, why is venture capital important for an economy?
Well, if we didn't have venture capital, who would fund the innovators?
Mm.
Government? I mean, we have wonderful government. In Switzerland, I think we have too much in the way of government support for startups. There are a lot of companies that should die, but they don't die because they get so much government support. We derisively refer to them as zombies. And then what happens is these good people are locked up in these companies and they don't get dispersed into other companies. So I think we need the VCs because we don't want governments doing all the funding. Just because I think they'll be ineffective at it or be less effective at it. Because VCs bring something else. They bring that experience, they bring their networks, they bring all the things that they've seen others do. They help you hire people. So the VC's job is more than just dispensing money. They're not an ATM. They're that plus the good ones, a ton of advice and a great network.
Yeah, and they kick people to where they should be at the end of the day. When I look at the Silicon Valley ecosystem, it's what you describe. It's VC investing in companies and entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
When I look at Europe, it's actually governments investing in entrepreneurs via public funding. What is your advice to European governments why they should change that? Because in their view, it works. So they have a lot of startups, they provide public funds, they have extremely good numbers, how much private capital
Mhm.
comes with government funds. And you said government shouldn't be involved in that ecosystem. So what's your
I mean,
advice?
yeah,
Why
no,
should they change?
they should be involved. And we tend to forget that in the United States we have the Small Business Administration. That was one of the triggers. I can't remember the exact date. I want to say it was late 70s that helped to get things going in the United States with funding, et cetera. Not quite at the level of what we do in Europe, but there was something to help small and medium-sized businesses to be supported. I think governments in Europe should continue to invest in research.
Mm.
So the research that's done at great universities, I think that should continue. And in the US, that has always been there. That's been part of the success of the US. Again, it's in danger right now, but I think that's a role that government can still play is put money into basic research that helps universities not only discover knowledge, but create technologies that then can be spun out into companies. But after that, I would put their money into venture funds. Yeah, put it into a VC fund and let
Mhm.
them, as professionals, make the choices of which startups get the money.
There's this interesting discussion here in Austria. When I look at the United States ecosystem, it looks like VCs invest in companies and the government plays the customer role. So basically, if in
Very
volunteer,
often.
Palantir, for example. I mean, Palantir
Yes.
with huge contracts. Even Elon Musk. I know it's a
Mhm.
controversial figure these days, but Elon Musk got a lot of government support
Sure.
on the customer side. When you look at the European ecosystem, even when the idea is to start a VC fund, it's mostly a discussion about government control, so that government also has a role on the board seats. And as an Austrian and European, I know this means that it never evolves into a real VC fund. What argument can we give our politicians to say, look, it's not the right way to do that?
So, I mean, I think you touched on something that's really, really important about the role of government, for example, in Silicon Valley. And this did not become clear to me until a couple of years ago. Again, a little anecdote. I was teaching a program here at IMD with Chinese bankers. Okay. So Chinese, that means they're government. Very senior people, very smart people. And at one point, the most senior person in the room asked me, what's the role of government in Silicon Valley? And I remember I very flippantly said, it has no role whatsoever. But then after I finished the class, I thought, am I right? And so I started looking, and for example, you cited Elon Musk. Without the $400 million loan from the US government, Tesla would not exist. If you look at SpaceX, without NASA budgets, SpaceX would not exist. So the government, or ICQ, the US venture, the CIA's venture capital arm, the defense, what's it called? Defense Innovation Unit, but they're not there to subsidize. They're there as customer, research partner, intellectual property. Yeah, they're there for a real role, not just saying, here's $10 million, go do something. And I think that is substantially different from the way we've tended to do it in Europe. So yes, government should be involved, but in the right roles. If I can get a purchase order from the government, that's worth more than the government giving me the same amount of money in cash.
Can we stay with this point a little bit?
Sure.
Because when I talk with people I know from my community, they sit in their offices and rarely see the entrepreneur, and their opinion is just okay. I mean, why does this make such a difference? They get 10 million when I purchase something for them, but I don't need it because it's not a product that I can use. So I rather give them a loan or a grant that they
Mhm.
can produce the product first, and if it's good, then I buy it. Why is this such a huge difference in the mindset of an entrepreneur?
Ah, well, okay, let me cite one thing I think that's very easy is that, being able to say I've got a customer allows you to get other customers.
Mm,
And it doesn't have to be the government. Let's say that you get a PO from BMW.
mm.
Now you're able to say that it doesn't matter. Maybe it's only $500,000. You've got BMW as a customer. This then gives confidence to others to work with you. And then it's the virtuous cycle that takes off. And I think it's the same thing with governments. I mean, they should not be buying things they do not need. But I mean, right now, with the militarization of Europe, this is a great opportunity for
Mm.
entrepreneurs. To be honest, I do not like the fact that we have to build up our militaries. I think it's a useless way to be spending our money. On the other hand, we do have a need. Okay, we can't ignore it. So here's an opportunity for governments to work with entrepreneurs rather than waiting for their own processes to take 10 years to come up with the next drone. Um, Earlier this year with my MBAs, we worked with a drone defense company. And it was just fascinating to see how even on the Swiss side, we're starting to get more supple and flexible as to the ability to work with small companies. I think that's only a positive thing for Europe. And hopefully we'll do more and more of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. And we have, unfortunately, to deal with human nature. And as long as humans exist, we have a need of
Yes.
army and defense. So there.
Yeah. And if you want to be anti-cynical, so optimistic, you could even look at what Trump's doing with tariffs as an opportunity for Europe. Say, okay, if we can't supply all the pharmaceuticals to the United States because suddenly they're too expensive, let's take care of ourselves.
Mm, mm,
Antibiotics. Antibiotics are a product that normally you don't make money on, but we still need them, otherwise we all die. Um, let's do it ourselves. Let's not wait for somebody in the United States to figure this out.
mm. Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity in the world
Mm,
right now, and we just have to grab it and use it and move it forward
exactly.
and take it. Do you see Silicon Valley moments in Europe?
How do you define Silicon Valley moments?
When I look at Silicon Valley in the last 30 years, it's basically this you mentioned, you coined the term in our conversation, engine. It's the engine of entrepreneurship. So if this heart, or let's maybe we say heart of entrepreneurship globally, if this heart stops beating, we have a problem globally because innovation dies. And the next round of NVIDIA's, Apple's, Alphabet's, Tesla's will not come to life, which means innovation slows down and they don't invest in other companies, ecosystems fold, and a lot of instability and taxes that we miss.
Mm,
Do you see such moments that in Europe such hearts start beating or such
yeah.
engines start running that could evolve into the next Silicon Valley?
Well, I'm always careful about your last statement, evolving into the next Silicon Valley, because I don't think Silicon Valley can or should be copied.
Mm,
I
mm,
think you can have beating hearts of entrepreneurship, not necessarily Silicon Valley model. I mean, I'll take my local region here, the canton of Vaud in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. Together, we have a joint venture with the canton to help scale ups. And the reason we have it is because we do have a lot of small startups. And the government said, okay, what else can we do besides giving them money? Because they try not to help them get through the scale up phase.
mm, mm,
And that's where they asked us to create a program that would do that. And I see it around me all the time now. Maybe I'm much more aware of it than other people might be. But I see more and more people who are willing to be entrepreneurs, who then are willing to persist with it to get through the scale up phase, and who see this as a viable career path. And again, this is something that's taken a long time. I think it was 2001 or 2002. The University of Lausanne asked me if I would come in and speak to the undergraduates about entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley, et cetera. And I remember asking them why. Why? I mean, Silicon Valley had just crashed. And they said, it's very simple. We want them to see entrepreneurship as a valid career path. We're not telling them to become entrepreneurs, but we want them to see that this is just as valid as going into banking, insurance, food, whatever. And that, yeah, again, that was the early 2000s. And now it's become a normal thing, perfectly normal. When one of my son's friends says that, he's joined a startup, for me, that's wonderful, just as much as it is for somebody who says, I'm getting my law degree and I'm going to be a lawyer. And I think that's the way it should be. So even within my tiny little region here, I do see a beating heart of entrepreneurship. And I'm sure there are many others that exist around Europe.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, a lot moving forward in Europe in the right direction. We talked about entrepreneurship and Silicon Valley, and I can imagine that a lot of young people these days take it a step further and say, I don't want to become an entrepreneur. I want to skip that. I don't want to have a corporate career either. I want to go directly into venture capital because I feel that investing in the next round of startups is the right thing for me. What advice do you give these people?
Don't do it. No, seriously, have patience and earn it. Join a startup first. Understand how, or if you don't want to join the startup, go into a venture capital firm as an analyst. Start at the bottom. Just like in any of the big consulting firms, you're going to work 80 hours a week. You're never going to get to be the one who does the presentation or makes the big decisions, but you'll learn it from the bottom up. I don't think I don't believe there are any shortcuts to this, unless you come from a rich family and you get them to subsidize your hobby. But I would much more err on the side of join a startup. This is something that I think we haven't talked about this. This is something that I think we lack in Europe. We don't have enough operators or former operators as venture capitalists. We have far more, in comparison to Silicon Valley, ex-bankers, ex-financial analysts, et cetera, who say, well, I understand how the money side of this works, so therefore I can be a VC. But again, they don't recognize that that's only one small portion of it. What we need are more operators, entrepreneurs, whether successful or not, but they've been there, they've done it. and they bring that to their decisions on where to invest. And we just don't have enough of those. Part of it is time and volume, but if we had more operator VCs, we would be more successful. I don't have any data to back that up, sorry, but I
Mm.
firmly believe that.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into this, even if it's without data and just experience, because this was the next question I had in mind, and you tapped right into that. When I look at my experience with VCs, I think it's really rare that I see an operator on a VC level.
Yep.
Why is this important to have someone with operational experience at the VC fund?
And part of it is empathy. And I don't mean it's because they become best friends and fall in love with each other, but they understand what the entrepreneur is going through. Yeah, and that's something that unless you've been through it, you can't understand it. You can sympathize with it, but that doesn't help very much. What you want is empathy, that you have some sense of what's going through that person's head as they try to make these tough decisions, or why they're arguing with you, or why they're doing whatever. That's one. Number two is understanding all these tiny but millions of details and decisions that have to be made. When you're sitting up on the board, you meet once a quarter or once a month, and it's all these big decisions, which are important. These are the door number one decisions where, if we walk through this door, we can't walk back. But there are hundreds of small decisions there that the entrepreneur is taking every single day and wrestling with. And I'd want my investors to be able to help me with that. And that requires an operator mindset. I mean, certainly there are people who are ex-bankers who are great VCs because they understand the financial mechanics, and we need that too. But it's hard for them to understand what the founder of a company is going through. And also, I think hard for them to evaluate, is this founder just a great founder, or is he or she also a great company builder? Because as an investor, you don't make money on just a great founder. You make money on a great company builder, organization builder. So unless you've been inside that, how can you evaluate this person as to he or she is going to be able to pull together a group of people, align them, and execute perfectly? That's hard to see unless you've been there.
Why is that so hard to see?
But you have to feel it. You have to be there at midnight when you're trying to make a decision on Sunday night and there's nobody around to help you decide, to see what people go through. You have to be there where you've got your engineers sleeping on the floor in the conference room as you try to hit a deadline for bringing the prototype to a client meeting. I mean, these are things I've been through, so they're seared into my memory. That
Mm.
how could somebody who's only seen my company from the clean boardroom discussion ever understand how hard that is, and the skill set that's required in a founder to get his team to get through those moments and to get himself through those moments. Yeah. I mean, it's like an academic trying to tell somebody who, here's my 2x2 matrix and what you should do. It's great guidance. It doesn't help you make the final decision.
Yeah. I think this is one of the most important points. Everybody wants to invest in the next Amazon, the next Nvidia, the next Apple, the next Microsoft at the time when they start. Because in retrospect, you see the huge returns they generated. And when I think back also to the 90s, I mean, a lot of people started companies.
Mhm.
And Jeff Bezos did nothing special. Back in the 90s, he started an online bookstore. And he was not the only one.
Yep.
Definitely, there were online bookstores in Europe, even in Austria.
Mm.
And the question, it was Lion CC back then. But my big question always was, what makes the difference between a Jeff Bezos who built Amazon and the guy who started Lion CC but failed out of Austria? What's the difference in
Well,
personality?
one part of it is something we've already said is luck.
Mm,
Bezos having the right luck, or Bill Gates having his mother talk to the people at IBM because she happened to be on their board. I mean, there's no, that's why when I meet people who have tried and failed, I would never look down on them,
mm,
because, you know, if they just gotten the right timing, the right moment, things that are out of their control, they could have been Jeff Bezos. And Jeff Bezos may have been some guy that we never ever heard of before.
mm.
Again, I think that can't be underestimated. But then you add on top of it the persistence, the
Mhm.
willingness to just keep at it. I have to change, I have to do this, I have to fire half my team and bring in somebody else because we've just pivoted. That kind of persistence and courage, not all of us have it,
Mhm. And you can only evaluate it and see it when you have lived through it at the end of the day and
in
gained
my opinion.
experience.
Yeah, in my opinion, yes. Maybe if you've been a VC for 10, 20 years, you've seen enough that you start to understand it. But again, it goes back to learning by doing. How are you going to be a great VC unless you've had the chance to see an entrepreneur fall apart or see one that was maybe not the best but succeeds? And then start to understand, okay, what are the things below? Is it just pure luck or is there something else? But
Mhm.
you need to have that raw material in order to learn from it.
Yeah, I also think we need more respect for operators and
Oh,
failure
yes.
in Europe. When while you were speaking, I was just trying to come up with a big VC fund that came from a European like mindset in the United States with bankers only, or the children of rich families at the end of the day, inheriting the wealth, and then the
Yep.
25-year-old girl or boy sits on boards of the next round of startups because her family brings in 100 million in that fund.
Yep.
When I think to the US funds, Mark Andreessen, Ben Horowitz, operators,
Yep. Of course.
uh, all the PayPal guys that started funds later on, Peter Thiel,
All
operator.
all operators. Yep.
I think
Yep.
there is more respect in the United States for operators than we
Yep.
have in Europe.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. Again, I'm sitting in Switzerland where banking is like the ultimate profession you can have here still. I'm sure I'm going to anger some people, but I've not met very many bankers who actually understand business. And I don't
Mm.
mean they don't understand how a bank works. They do, far better than ever I could. But the actual, I build, I sell, I make a profit, I build a team. There's not many, and they don't need to understand it in their role. So, and that's where the problem occurs is when they step into a VC role, then they do need to understand it. If you've never built something from scratch, how would you understand that?
Yeah, the evaluation process is different. When I look at public companies, you usually have a stable environment around this company, and you make investment decisions based on existing assets,
And you've got
machines, real
tons of
estate.
data, you've got lots of history. It's really easy to kind of draw a trajectory line and say, okay, this and this and this adds up to that. With a startup, you have none of that. You're talking to a human being who's got a great idea or has an idea, and he's got the energy, the desire, et cetera. Those are things that we can't quantify. So it is difficult.
So one part you said is luck, but the other parts are how does this person deal with people? How does this person motivate
Right.
people to move through a very difficult situation? How does that person deal with people close to bankruptcy? Can this person be positive when everyone else, when everything around them is falling apart? And this comes from experience,
Yeah.
not so much from books.
No. And, I've never met a single successful entrepreneur who hasn't had the experience of being 3 weeks from running completely out of money and not being able to pay his staff,
Uh,
and sometimes several times. And yet they keep the people motivated and they get through it. They find the money, whatever. That's part of the deal. Don't do this unless you're willing to go through that.
mm.
Um, and not paying yourself and trying to explain that to your spouse. I mean, that's part of the life.
So it's pretty much for LPs when they evaluate the fund, it means talk a little bit with the fund managers about their experience because it increases simply the stakes of or the odds of success for
Yes,
them.
very much so.
Yeah, that's great. When we are time flies when you have fun. I really enjoy this conversation with you, but I see that we are 10 minutes
Yes, we are.
coming close to the end. I have two sections open, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go
Future
ahead.
outlook and a little bit talking about IMD, what your role at IMD is, and what the future of IMD looks like, and what IMD can do for entrepreneurs and VCs and LPs.
Okay, so I've got several roles at IMD that involve entrepreneurship in addition to the work I do with corporations. One is I run IMD's startup competition where I look for 20 to 30 Swiss startups to work with our MBAs and EMBAs every year. So free help to these startups to try and accelerate them. Number two, I run the scale up program that we run with the Canton, where we're trying to help these companies go from being, a small startup that's raised $1 million, got first companies to get through to the next stage, which is really a leadership program more than anything is,
Mhm.
am I the right person to take us through that next stage? Do I want to go through that next stage? We do try to give them lots of content, but we're also just trying to help them look at themselves and say, am I the right person? Do I want to do this? And build up a network of people like them so they have somebody to call on. And then the third programmatic thing we do is the Venture Capital Asset Management Program, VCAM, we call it, where over 4 days, we're trying to help people understand really how venture capital works from the point of view of the nuts and bolts of it to how do pension funds look at venture capital as an asset class to how do we make decisions on exits, how do we make decisions on valuation, and then pull all of that together into a 2 day simulation, hands-on, living through the life of a 10-year fund and doing it competitively with other teams in the room, where you never have enough information, time is short, everybody is very stressed, and somehow you have to be the one that comes up with two unicorns, a dragon, whatever. So it's both picking the startups, picking the LPs, but then also managing the fund. It's fun to do. So those are the three key things that we do as far as entrepreneurship and venture capital at IMD.
There are two questions. Let's start with the first one. Leadership development for entrepreneurs from startup to scale up.
Mhm.
Why is this so important for entrepreneurs to look more inwards about towards their personality and their wishes and their wants in the future, and not just a theoretical program, how you
Uh,
can scale up?
I mean, let's think about the typical tech startup. Somebody finishes their PhD, they've got an amazing thing in their dissertation and decide to turn it into a product. If they can't pull a team together around that and align them and get them to believe in the vision and get motivated, there will never be a startup, much less a successful startup. So there's so much of it is less about your technical ability. I mean, in a sense, you've already proven that. Maybe there's still a lot of technical work to be done. But until you can align people and get them to move forward in kind of a single view of what our vision is, you can't be successful. And that's about leadership, about
Mhm.
understanding yourself, understanding how other people see you, and motivating them. So for me, that's why leadership is such a key part of anything we do in entrepreneurship here.
And why does it change from startup to scale up? Why is there such
Oh,
a
because it gets much more complex. Think about it. At the beginning, it's you and three others. You're sitting in the same room. You understand it. Maybe you have one customer. Now suddenly you've got four customers, five customers, six customers. They're more complex. They make more demands on you. Now you start getting departments in your organization. You don't know everybody in the team by first name, their birth dates, et cetera. It becomes harder to do. And yet, as we rise up psychologically, we get more worried about dropping down below. So we get even more, we push ourselves even harder because when you're at the beginning, you have nothing to lose. When we get to the scale up stage, now we've got something to lose
Mhm.
and we don't want to lose. So we push ourselves harder, we push everybody else harder, and that requires a whole nother level of leadership.
What are the three most important leadership lessons for scale ups?
Know yourself, have empathy for the people around you. And again, I'll emphasize that it's not about liking people or having sympathy, but understanding them and then being willing to let go.
Mm.
Because at a certain point, you are the bottleneck. You say, oh, why isn't our company growing fast enough? Probably because you're taking every decision. Now, I know there's this fad right now about founder mode, and I believe in it, but to a limit. If you're going to grow, you do need to let great people make great decisions. And probably they know more about the decision than you do because they're closer to the customer, they're closer to the technology. Let them do it, but make sure they have an understanding of where you want to go.
That's great. While you were speaking and presenting the IMT programs about venture capital, I was thinking, wait a minute, didn't Jim just tell me before that we see cannot be taught you need to practice it. And
Yes.
then you said
Yeah.
I was switching off already. And then you said we role play with the people. Ex
Exactly. So that's why we bring in the simulation.
yeah.
When we first did it, we didn't have that. And it was good, but not good enough. And we run in the simulation, and now I see a completely different outcome on it. People are both excited, they're confident, but also they understand, okay, taking those slides and turning it into successful fun is really hard. So I'm now very comfortable with the idea that you can learn, but you learn by doing, and we can help you do it in a program.
Does that make such a difference? Theoretical knowledge compared to the simulation phase? Is this, you saw
Yeah,
both sides,
I
the
mean,
outcome?
you need some kind of framework before you
Mm,
can do. I mean, I guess you could just blindly go in there and say, okay, let me see what happens if I do this. But when you've got some frameworks and you've already heard from some experts on how they've done it, then you can apply it. And
mhm.
then you see, I did this, it worked. Oh, I did this, it didn't work. I learned from that. And you do it rapidly so that you go through at least 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 learning loops during the program itself. And then hopefully by Sunday night, you're both exhausted, but you've got so much learning. I think that's how it works.
And you put the whole fund life into a simulation
Yes.
so that when people run through the simulation, they have to raise capital. They have from LPs, they
Yep.
have to invest in startups or scale-ups,
Yep.
and they have to make decisions what to drop, what to let go, where to double down, and also promote it to other VCs.
Right. And yeah, maybe do alliances with a VC, with another fund. I mean, all of these things. I mean, all of this was developed by a friend of mine, Chris Rangen in
Mhm.
Norway, and it just works beautifully.
I believe
You know,
that, yeah.
it's a simulation, but so real that you see people get into it. They forget that this is a classroom.
Yeah, games have tremendous educational value. I already saw it in the 80s with the business simulations, and it
Yeah.
just can put people through an experience and
Mhm.
they make decisions differently than at the
Yeah.
end of the day. That's solid. Last minutes, future. Where do you see the future of venture capital in Europe?
Oh, I hope it's going to become more like the United States, but with a European touch, in the sense of more operators making decisions or more non-operators understanding the value of the operators. So maybe lowering the hubris a little bit, having a little bit more humility in the way they work with entrepreneurs. I hope with what's going on right now that European entrepreneurs see that we can do great things here. You know, and I hope that the bureaucrats in Brussels and in our own national governments understand that they have a role to play in breaking down some of the barriers so that entrepreneurs can make Europe great again. How's that?
Yeah, I don't know if our politicians like that slogan.
I know, but I can't help it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, when I look at Europe, let's just assume, let's take, I think ferries are politically safe. So we can use a ferry example. Let's assume a ferry comes to you tonight and says, Jim, you can change three things in Europe to produce a better outcomes for entrepreneurs and VCs in 10 years. Which three things would you change right now?
So one would be what we've talked about is, breaking down some of the regulatory barriers in every industry that allows us to work across borders more seamlessly. And it doesn't have to be drastic, just some small things. Secondly, the same thing on the financial side, that, we should have a European financial community, not 27 different financial communities. And then third, the movement of people. We're putting up more and more barriers to people moving
Mhm.
around. Entrepreneurs should not have to worry about these things. They should be able to get the best talent they need from wherever it is. I mean, that's always been the secret of Silicon Valley success, attracting the best people in the world. We should be able to do that here as well.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially to the last point. It's so hard to get people into Europe on a legal way
Yeah,
for work, for paying taxes,
yeah.
and this should be much easier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jim, I had so much fun in this conversation with
So did
you.
I.
I really enjoyed every single second. How can people reach you best if they have follow-on questions?
I mean, if you put it in the show notes, put my email address, I'm happy to have them
Oh,
contact me there.
okay, great.
Um, I mean, people contact me often through LinkedIn. I'm more likely to respond to email than LinkedIn. So that's by far the best way to reach me.
Okay, if you don't mind, then I use the email address and put it in the description of the
Please.
podcast so
Yeah,
that people can directly reach out to you with their
I'd love to.
questions, join one of your programs.
Yeah,
And Jim, keep up your great work. Keep up motivating people to become entrepreneurs, become venture capitalists, and motivate also our politicians to change the regulations.
yes, yes. All
Jim,
right.
thank you very much. Have a great afternoon and talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you.